From mysterious artifacts of bygone civilizations to morbid sights that will send shivers down your spine, join me as we take a look at 15 of the most bizarre discoveries found in unexpected places. Number 15. Underwater Cave of Skulls. Cenotes are deep water-filled sinkholes that are created by the collapsing of the roofs of underground limestone caverns and can be found all over the waters of Mexico. One of these cenotes, in particular found in Sac-Uyum on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, has been on the locals' radar for decades. But what makes it so popular? Well, it's actually a place that many have feared to tread until 2012, when a team of divers found some pretty sinister artifacts. They came across two specific chambers of the cenote that were full of human bones and deformed skulls. After some serious research through history, National Geographic came out saying that those chambers were used for human sacrifices centuries ago by the ancient Maya. And the deformed skulls were the product of a very specific method of execution that flattened the top of the victim's or even the volunteer's cranium. Despite the mystique of the area's gorgeous cenotes, this is one place you don't want to stumble across. Number 14. The Utah Monolith. In November of 2020, the crew of a helicopter surveying the middle of Utah for sheep stumbled across something much more surprising. It was a smooth metal monolith. How did it get there? How long was it there? Will it advance human evolution as we know it? Probably not. The metal monolith was about 12 feet high and placed there by humans in reference to the famous Hollywood film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Social media went wild with the fun discovery. Internet sleuths were able to determine that the area was both inhospitable and incredibly hard to reach, only adding to the mystery of just exactly how it got there. The area was so remote that if anyone did manage to get up there, they would require rescuing to get back. And again, much to the surprise of the Utah Division of the Bureau of Land Management, the monolith vanished in the same month. Still, no one knows who put it there. Number 13. The American Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a famous historical site in England and a world-renowned tourist attraction. It's the only place like it in the world, right? Wrong. I'm sure there's plenty of stranger finds under the murky waters of Lake Michigan, but no one was prepared for this. In 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology at Northwestern Michigan College, Mark Hawley, found another Stonehenge right in his backyard. He found a series of strange stones 40 feet below the lake's surface, all arranged in a circle. And while very little is known about this underwater structure, one stone in particular had a carving of a mastodon engraved on it. Mastodons went extinct about 10,000 years ago, meaning this U.S. Stonehenge likely dates back that far. To this day, no one knows exactly what the stone circles are or who put them there. Number 12. Antikythera Mechanism. This mysterious deep-sea artifact was found by divers a century ago in 1901 and had researchers and scientists and archaeologists scratching their heads for another 100 years. 3 pieces of bronze that could easily have passed for moldy rocks had sat under the sea for about 2,000 years. When put together, though, they held a series of toothed gears that rings divided into degrees. This is the Antikythera Mechanism, and it turns out that this mechanism is an analog computer used by the ancient Greeks. It took X-ray technology to solve the mystery. This mechanism was used at the time as a sophisticated calendar and computer that mapped the solar and lunar calendars and counted down the days until the Olympic Games. It's about the size of a mantle clock, with knobs that are used to turn its hands with interlocking gear wheels, and even inscriptions on how to use it to read the moon and the planetary phases. It's pretty amazing, even by today's standards. Number 11. Windover Archeological Site. Next on our list of bizarre discoveries is perhaps the most mysterious and most morbid underwater find. But for this one, you won't need to traverse the seabed to uncover it. In 2016, divers found lots of human bones in a peat bog in the Gulf of Mexico and Florida. They reported their findings to archaeologists who did their own research and determined that the bones were at least 7,000 years old. After doing more research, they found that the peat bog was used as a burial site all those years ago. And while it was originally above ground, the shifting tides and sea levels submerged the site under the Gulf's waters. Luckily for the researchers, the water of the peat bog preserved the human remains, which included skulls and even brain tissue. After doing a little more digging, they also found artifacts like textiles and arrowheads, and even 37 separate grave sites. Luckily, the Windover archaeological site is now protected and only available to researchers to further uncover the history of the people who once resided there thousands and thousands of years ago. Number 10. Going down with the ship. Burial was pretty common amongst the royalty in ancient Egypt, and it was even more common for them to be buried with their personal belongings, even their boats. But in 2016, Czech archaeologists going for a normal dig in the sand uncovered something that left them all quite surprised. They dug up an ancient 62-foot-long funerary boat in a tomb made of mud and bricks. Carbon dating and a little bit of research dated the boat back more than 4,500 years. Much to their surprise again, the boat was well preserved, and the 1,000-year-old wood was still intact. But what really had them asking questions was, since it wasn't buried anywhere near a royal burial ground, what was it doing all the way out here? Was it buried with a commoner? And if so, what kind of commoner has a boat like this? How did they afford it? And with no water around, how did they bring it inland? The finding is so shrouded in mystery that the only people who will ever know the truth are likely the ones who put it there 4,500 years ago. Number 9. An underwater river. When you think of a river, you think of a body of water that runs through the land. But in 2016, researchers found a much more interesting kind of river. In the Black Sea, they uncovered an undersea river that's 350 times larger than the River Thames in England. Scientists from Leeds University sent an underwater robot to uncover the mystery and saw that it had carved out its own deep channels like a river on land would. The river has rapids, waterfalls, and can be as deep as 115 feet in some parts. It's the first known of its kind, and if it were on land, it would be the 6th largest river in the world. How is this even possible? Well, the answer was quite simple. This specific area of the Black Sea has a much lower salt content, so the undersea saline river has a much higher density, allowing for the separation. It's one of the coolest, if not trippiest, things you'll ever see. As the river moves about in the ocean, your eyes are telling you something like this just can't exist. But sometimes seeing really is believing. Number 8. Beach Graveyard. This next bizarre find on our list is gonna be one of the stranger and more creepy ones we've seen so far. Imagine going for a stroll along the beach on a beautiful day. You're enjoying the sweet sound of the waves crashing and receding and feeling the sea breeze on your face. But then you find a strange, large, seemingly out-of-place stone that reads, "Rest in Peace." Back in 2014, beachgoers found a pretty grisly scene at Ocean Beach in San Francisco, California. No, it wasn't another beach whale or a two-headed animal. Tombstones that dated all the way back to the late 1800s had washed up on shore. It turns out that at the turn of the century, the population of San Francisco had increased far too quickly, and housing developments were often built on top of existing cemeteries to keep up with demand. To make room for these new housing developments, the city had the gravestones removed and sent to a landfill to be used as seawalls, breakwaters, or broken apart and used as other forms of construction materials and infrastructure. But not all the gravestones made it to the landfill and were simply dumped into the San Francisco Bay, where they remained until erosion and strong winds caused the sands to shift, turning the most popular beach in the city into a historic graveyard. Number 7. Liverless Sharks. In 2017 in South Africa, what looked like a morbid nautical crime scene washed up on shore. On 3 separate occasions, the bodies of great white sharks had washed up on the shore, and they all had one thing in common other than being beached. Their livers were all missing. While it may be the logical guess that it was humans who removed the livers themselves, that wasn't the case. Is it possible that there's some sort of aquatic chupacabra in the warm waters with a taste for metallic liver? Or were the sharks subject to some strange ritual involving the organs of carnivores? It certainly made for one unsettling sight, and while the truth may help you rest a bit easier tonight, it's still pretty crazy. It took a small team of researchers to examine the bodies and perform autopsies to determine that the culprit was none other than orcas. One of these sharks was 16 feet long, weighing 2,500 pounds, so imagine the size of the orcas that took the shark down and then took their livers. And to make things even creepier, one shark was also missing her heart. Although it does sound strange, it turns out that hearts and livers of these giant great whites are the most nutrient-rich parts of the body, making them the perfect meal for a killer whale. But this also means that the orcas knew exactly where on the sharks' bodies to aim and dig in for their meal. Number 6. Göbekli Tepe. While there may be some gaps in the timeline of humanity, we pretty much know for sure our overall trajectory. Or do we? Every now and then something shows up that tests the authenticity of everything we've ever known and forces us to go back to the drawing board. It's been agreed on that early humans first settled into their permanent towns, built farms, and then temples, all in that order about 8000 BC. But a 1994 discovery kind of blew that theory wide open. Archaeologists in rural Turkey stumbled upon a fantastic finding in Göbekli Tepe. It included rings of enormous stone pillars, all of which had scenes of animals carved right in them. After some serious carbon dating, they found that this place dates back to the 10th millennium BC, making it the oldest place of worship in the world, at least until something even older decides to unearth itself. Göbekli Tepe raises some great questions, mainly, who were these people and who or what were they worshipping? How did they worship? Part of this beauty is we will never really know, but it's those types of questions that can keep scholars and academics up at night. But to make matters even more bizarre, evidence would suggest that the people of Göbekli Tepe were semi-nomadic hunters who didn't quite understand the concept of agriculture, especially because the cultivation of the earth at that level wouldn't appear for another 500 years. So now we have a classic chicken or the egg scenario here. Which came first, architectural projects and then permanent settlements, or was it the other way around? The only people who can know for sure were the ones who were there, and who knows, perhaps the people who dig up our cities millions of years from now could be asking the same questions about us. Number 5. The Aral Sea. The name Aral Sea can be a little misleading because despite the title, the Aral Sea is a vast desert that goes on as far as the eye can see in every direction. Located on the borders of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in the Central Asian steppes, it's also home to one of the strangest findings we've seen yet. If you go for a stroll in this seemingly desolate area, you'll find plenty of large objects that just don't belong there. Boats. The Aral Sea is dotted with plenty of rusted old sea vessels that have been sitting there unmoving and untouched for decades now. So the real question is, how did they get there? Were they dropped there by humans? How about aliens? Well, the simple answer is human intervention and erosion, lots of it. The Aral Sea was once a vast body of water, the 4th largest inland sea in the world, and a very popular spot for fishermen when the area was part of the Soviet Union. It was a bustling hub for commerce and supported thousands of people until the Soviets decided to divert the rivers that fed the Aral Sea to irrigate some local cotton fields. And by the 1960s, the area began to dry up and recede. But as the water began to evaporate, the seas saw a higher concentration of salt, and that, coupled with the new fertilizers and pesticides being used, the fish quickly began dying. More and more vessels would get stuck in the mud, forcing their crew to abandon them, and eventually that mud dried up into the sand we see today, forever trapping the boats in what is now a strange ship graveyard. Number 4. The world's largest basement. In 1963, in Turkey, Mustafa Bodizmir was tearing down some walls in his home to make room for a basement. What should have been a routine renovation turned out to be much, much more. During Bozdemir's dig, he found that he wasn't the first person to live in that exact spot, not by a long shot. He ended up unearthing the ancient city of Derinkuyu, which dated back to 1200 BC. The old city was dug about 200 feet underground and was once home to about 20,000 people in its heyday. Naturally, it made headlines in the 1960s, and Bozdemir's would-be basement became a hot archaeological site. They found a whole network of cities and homes, all of which were connected by miles of underground tunnels and caves that had been carved right into the area's volcanic rock. Derinkuyu is a multi-leveled city, with the deepest regions going down over 200 feet into the earth, and there was even a 180-foot ventilation shaft that kept the air fresh down in the depths of the earth. The old city is full of stables, shops, and even a place of worship. Researchers found that it was once a bustling underground metropolis with its own trade-based economy. But Bazdemir's home isn't the only way to enter Derinkuyu. After further excavation, they found another 600 entry points into the city, most of which were used to help hide the locals during times of war. Now, Derinkuyu is an incredibly popular tourist destination in Turkey. Number 3. Which jar is which? While they may not be stirring up some brew in a cauldron or flying on broomsticks, witches are more or less real. People have been practicing harmless witchcraft in some form or another for years. It's likely, though, that these are just watered-down versions of pagan rituals that have been passed down for generations, many of which involved a strong focus on the earth and the elements. Folks in the Star and Garter Inn in Watford, England got a bit more than they bargained for when they stumbled across an anti-witchcraft jar in a chimney. So while witchcraft may freak some people out, this glass anti-witch jar is even freakier because it was full of pins, thorns, human hair, nails, teeth, fingernail clippings, and some good old urine. The bottle most likely dates back to the 1600s when the horrific Salem witch trials were in full effect. People were as ignorant as they were scared back then, which is why about 100 more of these anti-witch bottles were found tucked away in more homes in the Watford area. And it's said the contents were meant to lure witches into the bottle to be trapped forever. So just imagine the horror people must have experienced when they were giving their house a much-needed deep clean, only to find one of these jars. Ugh. Number 2. Human helmets. Throughout our history, humans have done some things that us modern-day folk would consider strange, really strange. There are rituals and fashion trends that we'll just never understand, but there's one that will really leave you scratching your head. During a 2-year excavation between 2014 and 2016 in Ecuador, archaeologists came across a 2,000-year-old funeral mound. Nothing out of the ordinary here, that is, until they saw what was inside. There were the bone remains of 2 infants wearing what looked like strange helmets, and upon further investigation they found that these helmets were in fact the skulls of other younger children. These children were part of the Gwangala culture, which dates back to about 100 BC, and this find in particular is the only of its kind, which could imply that these ancient peoples used juvenile crania as some sort of ritual mortuary headgear. So this raises the question of whose skulls is the headgear made from? Was it taken from another body, or did they have to make helmets from living subjects? It's another classic case of we'll never know, but these buried infants were both less than 2 years old and were quite literally wearing the skulls of much older children, which allowed the headgear to fit over their faces. But to make matters worse, young human skulls don't hold together very well when they're bare, meaning the helmet still had flesh on them when these babies were buried. This find is certainly one of the most bizarre, if not bone-chilling, discoveries archaeologists have ever found. Number 1. Voynich Manuscript. This final entry on our list is dedicated to all the bookworms out there. And while you can certainly flip through the pages of this book, you'll never actually be able to read it. The Voynich Manuscript is a bizarre 250-page tome discovered by an antique bookseller in 1912, and to this day, no one has any clue what it truly contains. The pages of the Voynich manuscript are full of all sorts of hand-drawn illustrations that range from nude portraits to the zodiac signs to what seem like medicinal herbs. But the entire thing is written in a writing system that has completely eluded the best academics. No one has any idea what they're talking about within the pages. The Voynich manuscript is easily one of the most talked about books of the century and is currently housed at Yale University's Beneke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. And while the book was discovered about 100 years ago, it most likely dates back 6 centuries to Central Europe. And naturally, a bizarre find like this is going to stir up all sorts of theories, one of which being that the entire thing is a Renaissance-era hoax filled with made-up gobbledygook. But then that begs the question of why would someone put in all that time and effort to make a 250-page joke? Others believe that the book is written in a nearly uncrackable code, but one professor of linguistics claims to have deciphered 14 of the manuscript's chapters. There is a solid chance that we'll never know exactly what the Voynich manuscript is going on about, but judging from the illustrations, it could simply be a book about nature. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.